At negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, your suburban home becomes a death trap within hours of losing power. The furnace dies, pipes freeze and burst. The temperature inside drops 1 degree every 12 minutes until the interior matches the killing cold outside. Yet right now, scattered across Alaska's back roads and remote pull-offs, people are sleeping soundly in truck campers with no heater running at all. Not because they're tough, not because they're suffering, but because they've built something far more reliable than any furnace, a passive thermal system that turns physics into shelter. This isn't about enduring cold, it's about understanding it so completely that you make it irrelevant. The camper isn't trying to fight the minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit night, it's creating a separate reality measured in inches where the only thing that matters is the microclimate around your body. You generate roughly 80 to 100 watts of heat just lying there breathing, the same output as an old incandescent bulb. In a properly built system, that's enough. The challenge isn't producing warmth, it's trapping it, managing moisture, and eliminating the silent failures that turn shelters into coffins. What looks like a simple metal shell on a pickup bed is actually a precisely layered fortress where every material, every gap, every vent serves a specific function in the war against convective loss, conductive bleeding, and condensation. While modern homes depend on natural gas networks, electrical grids, and supply chains stretching thousands of miles, this system runs on knowledge. It has no moving parts to break, no fuel to freeze, no igniter to fail at 3 a.m. when you're 50 miles from the nearest town. Just insulation, air management, and your own body heat working together in a way that's been refined through decades of Alaskan winters. The warmth isn't outsourced. It's engineered, captured, and controlled entirely by the person inside. The decision to sleep without heat isn't about toughness or tradition. It's a calculated engineering choice rooted in a simple truth. Every heater is a list of things that can go wrong in conditions that don't forgive mistakes. Propane gels below minus 44 degrees Fahrenheit, but even before that threshold, regulators can freeze, lines can develop ice crystals, and flow becomes erratic. The piezo igniters that work flawlessly at sea level sputter and fail in deep cold. Catalytic heaters need ventilation, but also produce moisture, the exact thing you're fighting to keep out. Diesel heaters require batteries, and batteries lose 50% of their capacity at minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. A Chinese diesel unit might run perfectly for months, then throw a glow plug fault when you need it most. Then there's carbon monoxide. In a sealed or poorly vented space, a malfunctioning heater doesn't just fail to keep you warm, it kills you quietly while you sleep. Every winter, across the rural United States, people die this way in RVs, ice, fishing shacks, and campers. The propane keeps flowing, the oxygen gets consumed, and the sleeper never wakes up. For someone parked alone on a logging road or a frozen riverbank, that risk isn't theoretical. It's the reason experienced Alaskans treat heaters with cautious respect or eliminate them entirely. A passive sleep system has 0 failure points, no combustion, no electricity, no mechanical parts. You bring insulation, knowledge, and discipline. If you build the system correctly and follow the protocol, it works at minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit the same way it works at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The performance doesn't degrade. There's no fuel to run out. The only variable is you, and that's a variable you can control through preparation. This philosophy extends beyond just staying warm. It's about maintaining mobility and minimizing weight. A diesel heater, fuel tank, battery, and ducting can add 60 pounds and eat up precious interior space in an already tiny camper. For hunters, glassing remote ridges, or workers rotating through distant job sites, that weight matters. So does simplicity. The fewer systems you carry, the fewer things you troubleshoot in the dark wearing gloves. This is the Alaskan calculus. Reliability beats comfort, and knowledge beats technology. When your safety depends on a system working every single time, you choose the one that can't break. The camper shell itself is not shelter in any real sense. It's a wind block, a snow shield. The actual work of creating survivable space happens in the 6 inches of material between the outer skin and the interior air, and in the meticulous elimination of every pathway where heat can escape. Insulation doesn't warm anything. It slows the movement of heat from warm to cold, and it does this by trapping air in thousands of tiny pockets. Air is one of nature's best insulators when it's motionless. The moment it moves, it becomes convection, and convection strips heat away fast. So the goal of every insulation job is to divide space into cells so small that air cannot circulate. Rigid foam boards, extruded polystyrene or polyisocyanurate, excel at this. They're stiff, moisture-resistant, and deliver high R values per inch. R value is thermal resistance. The higher the number, the slower heat moves through. In an Alaskan truck camper, builders aim for R10 or better in the walls and ceiling. That might mean 2 inches of foam, cut to fit every curve and corner, glued and taped into place so tightly that no air gap remains. The harder job is dealing with thermal bridges. These are the metal ribs, aluminum framing members, and steel fasteners that form the camper's skeleton. Metal conducts heat roughly 1,000 times better than foam. Leave an exposed rib, and it becomes a superhighway pumping warmth straight outside, creating a cold spot on the interior surface where frost instantly forms. Experienced builders treat thermal bridging like a contamination problem. Every piece of metal gets wrapped or covered. Some use specialized thermal break tape. Others build a secondary interior frame out of wood, which conducts far less than aluminum, and mount paneling to that. The effort seems excessive until you spend a night at -30°F and notice the one spot you missed. A 3-inch strip of frame you thought wouldn't matter, now coated in a sheet of ice. Floors get double or triple layers. The truck bed itself is a massive heat sink, a flat plane of freezing metal in direct contact with your sleeping platform. Builders lay down sheets of closed-cell foam, then plywood, then more foam, creating a thermal sandwich that breaks conductive pathways. Some add reflective bubble wrap or radiant barriers, which reflect infrared heat back into the space. It's not about one miracle material. It's about layering different strategies, trapping air, blocking conduction, reflecting radiation, until the cumulative effect creates a genuine barrier. Gaps around doors, vents, and windows get sealed with weather stripping and foam tape. Not to make the space airtight, that would be deadly, but to stop drafts. A draft is just convection with intent. Cold air rushes in, warm air rushes out, and your body works overtime trying to reheat the space. The goal is controlled ventilation, not accidental leakage. When it's done right, the camper interior might only be 5 or 10 degrees warmer than outside when you first climb in. That sounds terrible, but it's deceiving. That stable pocket of still air, protected from wind and insulated from conductive loss, is the foundation. The warmth comes next, generated by your body and held close by the sleep system. The shell's job isn't to be warm, it's to be a stable, windless, moisture-controlled container where your own heat can accumulate instead of vanishing into the night. The sleeping bag sitting on top of your truck bed isn't the system. It's one component in a 3-layer heat management stack, and if you get the order wrong or skip a piece, the whole thing fails. The first layer, the one most people underestimate, sits between you and the cold metal floor. This is the sleeping pad, and in subzero conditions, it matters more than the bag itself. Heat moves through conduction wherever your body touches a colder surface. Lying directly on a truck bed at -30°F is like lying on a block of ice that stretches infinitely in every direction, pulling warmth out of you faster than your metabolism can replace it. The solution is a high R value pad, rated R5 or higher, thick enough to create a genuine thermal break. Closed-cell foam pads are bomb-proof. They can't puncture, can't leak, and insulate consistently even if they get damp. Insulated air pads offer more comfort and sometimes higher R values, but they introduce a failure point. Many Alaskans run both: closed-cell foam on the bottom as insurance, insulated air pad on top for comfort. If the air pad fails overnight, you still have a backup preventing conductive heat drain into the floor. The second layer is the sleeping bag or quilt, and this is where temperature ratings become dangerously misleading. A bag rated to 0°F isn't promising comfort at 0. It's promising survival, the temperature at which an average person won't die during a controlled test. Comfort happens 20 or 30 degrees warmer. For sustained nights at -20 degrees Fahrenheit or below, experienced users choose bags rated to -40 degrees Fahrenheit or colder, treating the rating as a baseline, not a guarantee. The fill determines performance. Down insulation offers the best warmth-to-weight ratio and compresses into nothing for storage, but it has one catastrophic weakness: moisture. Wet down clumps, loses loft, and stops insulating. In the humid environment of a camper where you're exhaling water vapor all night, this becomes a real risk over multi-day trips. Synthetic insulation is heavier and bulkier, but it retains most of its insulating ability even when damp, making it more forgiving of moisture mismanagement. Some Alaskans split the difference, layering a synthetic quilt over a down bag to protect the down from condensation while keeping total weight manageable. The third layer is the secret weapon most casual campers have never heard of: the vapor barrier liner. This is a non-breathable sack, essentially a waterproof shell, worn inside the sleeping bag against your base layers. The concept sounds backwards. Breathability is supposed to be good. Trapping moisture against your skin sounds miserable. But the VBL stops your body's perspiration, up to a liter per night, from ever reaching the sleeping bag's insulation. The moisture stays on your skin or gets absorbed by your clothing, but the expensive down or synthetic fill remains bone dry, maintaining full loft and effectiveness night after night. The trade-off is real. You feel clammy, and it takes discipline to tolerate. But on extended trips where you can't dry out a damp bag, the VBL is the difference between a system that degrades daily and one that performs consistently for a week straight. Clothing inside the bag matters too. Too much, and you compress the insulation, creating cold spots. Too little, and your body works harder to warm the empty airspace. The goal is snug, but not tight, with moisture-wicking base layers that move sweat away from skin. A warm hat is non-negotiable. Your head is a radiator, and leaving it exposed bleeds heat faster than any other body part. Some people sleep with a neck gaiter or balaclava pulled over their face, pre-warming inhaled air and reducing the moisture load their breath dumps into the camper. This layered system isn't about buying the most expensive gear. It's about understanding how heat moves and building redundancy into every level. The pad stops conduction. The bag stops convection and radiation. The VBL stops moisture contamination. Your clothing fine-tunes the microclimate. Each piece does one job well, and together they create a mobile cocoon where your body's 80 watts of resting heat output is enough to maintain core temperature through the coldest night Alaska offers. You exhale roughly a liter of water vapor over the course of a night's sleep. In a heated home, this moisture disperses harmlessly into the larger air volume or gets vented outside through HVAC systems you never think about. In a 12 cubic foot truck camper at -30 degrees Fahrenheit, that same liter of water becomes a slow-motion disaster unless you manage it with surgical precision. Warm air holds moisture. Cold air doesn't. When your breath, hot, wet, loaded with humidity from your lungs, hits the freezing interior surface of the camper shell, physics takes over instantly. The air temperature drops, its capacity to hold water collapses, and the vapor condenses into liquid. At subzero temperatures, it skips the liquid phase entirely and crystallizes straight into frost. By morning, every surface you didn't insulate perfectly is coated in a layer of white ice. The ceiling, the walls, the window edges, even the inside of the door latch. It looks like a freezer because it is one. This frost isn't just annoying, it's destructive. When morning sun hits the camper or you introduce any heat source, that frost melts. Water runs down the walls, soaks into your gear, saturates your sleeping bag. If temperatures drop again before things dry, you're now sleeping in a system contaminated with ice. Insulation loses effectiveness. Weight increases. Synthetic fills might survive, but down becomes useless. Over multiple nights, the cumulative moisture load turns your carefully built thermal system into a cold, wet failure. The only defense is ventilation, and it has to be constant. You crack a roof vent and a small window on opposite sides of the camper, creating crossflow. Cold, dry air from outside enters, mixes with the warm, moisture-saturated air inside, and exits through the opposite vent, carrying water vapor with it. The exchange is slow and controlled, just enough to purge humidity without creating a wind tunnel that strips away your body heat. This is the balance. Vent too little, and you wake up in a frost cave. Vent too much, and you freeze because you're heating the outdoors. The cold air coming in feels counterintuitive. You're trying to stay warm, and you're deliberately letting freezing air into your shelter. But that outside air, despite being colder, is also drier. Winter air at -30 degrees Fahrenheit holds almost no moisture. When it enters the camper and warms slightly from your body heat, its relative humidity drops even further, turning it into a sponge that pulls moisture out of the air. The thermodynamics work in your favor if you manage the flow correctly. Positioning matters. Roof vents pull warm, moist air up and out naturally through convection. A cracked window low on the opposite wall lets cold air in near the floor, where it sinks and flows across the space before warming and rising toward the roof vent. You're engineering a gentle convection loop using nothing but temperature differences and careful vent placement. Some campers install small, passive vents with adjustable louvers, allowing fine control over airflow without getting out of the sleeping bag to adjust a window. Breath management becomes part of the routine. Breathing directly into the open air of the camper dumps maximum moisture into the space. Some experienced users sleep with their nose and mouth inside the sleeping bag, exhaling into the bag's interior where the VBL traps moisture before it escapes. Others use a simple trick. Sleep with your head near the cracked window so your breath exits directly outside instead of humidifying the entire camper. It's a small adjustment that cuts moisture load significantly. Condensation is patient. It doesn't announce itself. You don't feel it accumulating. You just wake up surrounded by frost. Or worse, you don't notice until day 3 when your sleeping bag feels heavier and colder than it should. By then, recovery is hard. Everything needs to dry, and drying gear at sub-zero temperatures without a heat source is nearly impossible. Prevention is the only strategy that works. You ventilate every night, without exception, even when it's -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and every instinct says to seal yourself in. The camper stays dry, the insulation stays effective, and the system keeps working because you never let moisture win the first round. The unheated truck camper succeeds because it rejects the central premise of modern comfort, that warmth comes from machines. Grid-dependent homes treat heat as a utility to be purchased and piped in, outsourcing thermal survival to infrastructure networks that stretch across continents. Natural gas flows through pipelines from distant wells. Electricity travels hundreds of miles from power plants. When any link in that chain breaks, a storm, a transformer failure, a supply disruption, the system collapses instantly. The house doesn't just become uncomfortable, it becomes uninhabitable. Pipes burst, food spoils. Within hours, interior temperatures drop to levels that threaten life. The camper inverts this equation entirely. Warmth isn't imported. It's generated on-site by your body and captured through layers of material that obey physics, not supply chains. The system requires no fuel deliveries, no electrical grid, no mechanical components vulnerable to temperature extremes. It operates identically whether you're parked behind your house or 200 miles up a frozen river with no road access. The performance is location independent because the system is self-contained. This represents a fundamentally different kind of wealth. Not financial wealth, though the camper system costs a fraction of a home heating bill. The wealth here is knowledge, understanding heat transfer well enough to manipulate it with foam and fabric. It's the wealth of skills that don't degrade. Knowing how to layer insulation, manage moisture, and calibrate ventilation based on temperature and humidity. These capabilities can't be cut off by someone else's decision. They don't depend on infrastructure maintenance or fuel prices. They exist entirely within the person who learned them. Resilience in this context isn't about toughness or deprivation. It's about eliminating dependencies on systems you can't control. A home furnace offers superior comfort right up until it doesn't, and then it offers nothing. The passive camper system offers less comfort but operates across a wider range of conditions with zero failure modes. When your core requirement is stay alive through the night, reliability matters more than peak performance. The camper delivers the same outcome, survivable sleep, whether it's the first night or the 100th, because nothing breaks, nothing runs out, and nothing relies on external inputs. Mobility amplifies this advantage. The grid-tied home is geographically fixed. If conditions around it deteriorate, whether from weather, infrastructure failure, or other threats, occupants either endure or evacuate, leaving their shelter behind. The truck camper moves. The entire survival system, all 12 cubic feet of engineered thermal protection, relocates wherever the truck drives. This transforms how you navigate risk. Bad weather approaching one valley, drive to another, job site 200 miles north. Your sleeping system comes with you, performing identically in the new location because it never depended on the old one's infrastructure. The contrast becomes starkest during regional failures. Winter storms that knock out power to thousands of homes don't affect the camper occupant at all. They were already operating off-grid. The same knowledge that keeps someone comfortable at a remote trailhead keeps them alive during a suburban power outage, while neighbors scramble for hotel rooms or emergency shelters. The system's simplicity makes it anti-fragile. It doesn't just tolerate disruption, it's designed from the beginning to assume disruption is the baseline condition. What looks like sacrifice from the outside, sleeping in a cramped metal box instead of a heated bedroom, is actually a form of insurance. You're practicing a survival system during routine use, so it's already tested and familiar when conditions deteriorate. The techniques become automatic. Ventilation calibration, moisture monitoring, layer, adjustment. These aren't emergency procedures you hope to remember under stress. They're daily habits, refined through repetition until they require no conscious thought. The most sophisticated survival machine often has the fewest moving parts because every component you add creates another failure point. The furnace breaks, the generator runs out of fuel, the battery dies. But insulation just sits there, trapping air, doing the same job at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit that it does at zero, asking nothing, requiring nothing, failing never. Your body generates heat as long as you're breathing. The sleep system captures it. The shell protects the system from wind and precipitation. That's the entire mechanism, and it works because it's built on physics that don't change, using materials that don't degrade, performing a function that requires no energy input beyond what you're already producing just by being alive. In the harshest cold, the most reliable warmth comes from the system that can't fail, because it has nothing to break. No igniter, no fuel line, no battery, just insulation trapping air, vapor barriers blocking moisture, and your own body doing what it already does, generating heat. The Alaskans sleeping soundly in unheated campers at minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit aren't suffering. They've simply built something more dependable than any furnace, a passive fortress that turns physics into shelter and knowledge into survival. If this investigation into extreme cold weather engineering showed you a different way to think about resilience, subscribe. We keep digging into the systems that work when everything else fails,